And I would like to ask Antonia to come and join us to talk about a standard that the BBC has been working on and has shared openly. And that standard is something that the BBC are also downstairs talking about in the DX area where the BBC has a table. So thank you, whoever just fixed that. Transparency has come up a lot in the discussions this morning as a word. And Antonia is going to focus on transparency in the age of AI. Antonia.
So thank you all very much for having me. Unlike some of our other speakers, I'm actually not going to talk that much about AI today, but instead I'm going to talk about some of the work we've been doing to develop and implement C2PA, which is a media provenance standard, in order to enable transparency, particularly for news media organizations in the age of AI. So basically, for all of us, I'm sure it's nothing new that disinformation and deepfakes online are a huge problem. It's something we've been trying to solve for a long time, and so that, as I said, isn't a new issue. But what is new, of course, is the advent of generative AI, which basically allows anyone, anywhere, to produce highly believable content at scale, really cheaply, and to be able to distribute it to a lot of people very quickly. So the issue with that, and I think there's a lot of research that sort of supports this, isn't so much that, you know, someone's going to see an image of the Pope in a puffer jacket and actually assume that he's having a fashion crisis and act accordingly. But rather, all of this sort of deep fake disinformation that we see online has an effect of essentially eroding the information, the trust in the information ecosystem. And so people are much less likely to trust whatever content they might see online, as well as the institutions that produce it. And we think that is a huge issue for us as individuals, we think that's an issue for our democracies, and we think it's an issue for our societies as well. So the BBC as an organization also isn't immune to this problem, right? We also are experiencing a decline in trust as an institution. And so one of the ways that we're trying to address this is to sort of embed a series of, I would say, values in all of our journalistic output. So those include accuracy, impartiality, and transparency. And transparency is sort of a new idea for us. It's something that came about with our new CEO for news. But it's really about how we can make sure our audiences understand exactly what we're doing internally and how we're doing it in an effort to try and rebuild that trust. So BBC R&D sort of sat down and thought, okay, how can we actually develop a technological enabler that allows us to do this, that makes it easier for our journalists to be able to verify whether or not a piece of information that they're looking at is actually true, that allows us to sort of foreground the work that our journalists are doing in the pursuit of truth, and most importantly, that actually allows us to maintain the integrity of our brand. So if something says that it came from the BBC, people who are seeing that content can actually trust that it does. So that brings me to Project Origin, which is a collaboration between the BBC, Microsoft, CBC Radio Canada, and the New York Times. And that's sort of a separate group which is sort of interrelated with C2PA, which is the larger standards body, and there's a lot of folks who are a part of that. But Project Origin is really the team that came together to sort of figure out, okay, how might we implement this standard in practice? So what I would be showing you is sort of images and mock-ups of actually what this looks like, so I'll do my best to describe it. But basically, what we have created is the equivalent of sort of a cryptographic Twitter blue tick. So it would sit in a piece of media content, in an image, and it would contain a set of data. And as it stands right now, the data that it contains is essentially up to anyone. So you can have a lot of information, you can have less. So in the mock-up that I had, there's an example showing, you know, that this image is published by the BBC, and it has the date, time, and location of where that photo was taken. So one thing that is sort of interesting in this discussion is we don't make any assumptions about the actual truthiness of a particular organization. So the image itself might be fake, but it's up to you as the audience member to decide whether or not you trust the source that is publishing it. But what you can rest assured in knowing is that if something says it comes from Russia Today or the BBC, that is in fact the source that it comes from. And equally, if there is any information, any metadata that's contained, if it's been altered by AI in some kind of way or produced by AI, you would be able to see that as well. So all of these steps are sort of captured in a way that allows audiences to understand what's going on. So there are two use cases that we are currently in the process of trialing right now. The first is on our bbc.co.uk website, which basically has the same cryptographic Twitter blue tick. But the difference is that we actually highlight the sort of editorial processes that our journalists go through in order to ensure that something is verified. So we have a team called the Verify team. They essentially go through a lot of user-generated content. So if someone's taking a picture on an iPhone in a war zone, they will go through and verify whether or not that image is in fact true. And in this particular use case, what this metadata allows us to do is to show to our audiences, this has been verified, these are the steps that we've taken, and we're able to be transparent about all of that directly with our audiences. The second use case is that we're hoping to work with third-party platforms, and in this example, we would just sort of verify that a piece of content has come from the BBC. But as more and more content out there sort of may look like it comes from us, it has our colors, it has our branding. If it doesn't have that verification mark, in theory, people might question whether or not it's authentic and hopefully not pass it on. So we're currently in the process of actually making this a reality, and I have to say, since sort of the generative AI hype has really grown, we have seen a huge amount of interest in this particular standard. So we have been surveying our audiences to sort of try and understand how much information is too much to include, because sometimes people don't understand what steps a particular photo goes through before you see it, on your screen. So too much information may actually have the opposite effect and potentially erode trust. We're working really closely with our journalists, who we know are time poor, to make sure that whatever we create, this and the implementation of C2PA doesn't impact them in any way, and it's as easy for them to use as possible. And we have a trial that will hopefully be starting in the next couple of weeks or so of the first ever BBC implementation of C2PA on a piece of content. So we'll be announcing that when that actually happens, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And of course, we are working really hard, and I know hopefully some of you have seen the work that my colleagues have been doing in the demo area to build a coalition around the use of this standard. And I think just earlier this week, Meta announced that they were going to be implementing the standard amongst others. So we're starting to see real engagement from the tech and media industry more broadly, which is really exciting. So because you couldn't see it on the screen, definitely do go visit the demos so you can actually see what this looks like in practice. And I'm around if there are any questions. Thank you very much.